As a pastor in a post-Christian city, I encounter a recurring sentiment every time people ask me what I do with my life. A significant number of people in my city used to subscribe to the Roman Catholic way, especially in my francophone-heavy part of the city, while others have at one point or another been part of one of the Protestant denominations. There are a few that have never had any religious experience, but for the most part, the adults that I speak to have had a religious experience of one kind or another. The sentiment that I encounter the most is anger. In our corner of the world, where for the most part people are measured in the words that they say, the anger is hidden beneath the layers of beautifully crafted words. If you do not know how to speak the vernacular of our particular corner of the world, you would not be able to realize it when you encounter it because it is so well concealed in Ottawa speak. In recent years, I've moved from being a silent bystander to being a vocal ally of LGBT people. And as I have done so and had more and more conversations with LGBT people, their friends, supporters, and sympathizers, I've heard over and over again about the damage that the church has caused to these precious people. My job as a pastor, it seems, brings up a lot of latent emotions in people where sexual minorities are concerned, and based on our track record as the global church, I can pretty much understand why. You see, the historic church has a really schizophrenic track record. Over the centuries, the church has been responsible for the advancement of science, the expansion of education, healthcare, and even equal rights across the globe. But laced within our track record of glowing positive achievement, you can find polar opposite deposits of hatred, oppression, slavery, discrimination, and war. As much as people have done some pretty amazing things in the name of Christ and still do to this day, other people also do some downright terrible things in his name. Let me give you a small example of how messed up this is. The very week that a former American president claimed that God called him to invade Iraq, a war that has precipitated incredible instability in the Middle East, I had the opportunity to sit with a missionary that told me he was convinced that God was calling him to the Middle East to work among oppressed groups. So, in the same week, I heard one Christian claim that God was calling him to lead this country to the horrors of war, and another claim that God was calling him to do what he could do to end the horrors of war. Talk about schizophrenic. During the American Civil Rights Movement, you had a group of reverends and pastors leading the civil rights charge. You also had reverends and pastors on the other side of the social debate claiming that God not only supported but also sanctioned the separation and even possible subjugation of racial minorities. You know, Solomon, the great philosopher and author of two of the deepest books of the Bible, once said something so tongue-in-cheek and so true. This is what he said: "Dead flies in perfume make it stink, and a little foolishness decomposes much wisdom." So, as much as there are pockets of the church that have done and will continue to do some pretty amazing things in this world, the fact of the matter is that the really bad things that other pockets of the church do really undoes any good thing we may think we have been responsible for. And this is why there is anger, and in pretty much every case, it is justifiable anger. So, in the face of this weirdness, is it possible to rebuild faith? I think it is. It is tough, but it is possible. First of all, you have to remember that not all apples are bad apples. In fact, I would wager that if you take your eye off the crazies in the church for a moment, you will see people that are Christ followers, that are level-headed, deeply interested in and compassionate towards the human condition, and even vocal opponents of the crazies in their fellowships. We started Pivot 613 precisely because we wanted to change the channel. We looked at all the people that were turned off by the status quo and realized that we had to carve out a new path where the narrative is one of love and not one of fear, one of grace instead of one of judgment. And as a matter of fact, there are many many small communities like ours springing up all over the world, calling for a stop to the madness and rediscovering the theologies that amplify what is awesome about Christ and turning down the volume that our prejudices bring to the table. You see, no one group is homogeneous. Every time you try to paint one people group with one general color, the deeper you look at them, the more you realize that there are more than just a handful that completely break the stereotype you are trying to create. Now, the second and final thing you need to consider if you want to rebuild faith is forgiveness. Even if you never reach the point that you become a fully devoted follower of Christ again, you have to at least acknowledge the fact that you need to let go of anger to live a more wholesome and balanced life. I would wager that if you dig deep enough into the issue, you will find that you are not really angry at God. You're angry at his representatives. Yes, there's some weird things in the Bible that people cherry pick to defend their position, but I would argue that the only way to know what God was truly thinking or to know how his heart looks like is to look at Jesus. Jesus helps us to make sense of God. He is God with us, revealed to us. Once you get that perspective, you start to see how the people that speak on behalf of God and then proceed to hurt you, or those that you're concerned about or love, are doing it out of their own crap and certainly not on behalf of God. Because Jesus did not come to condemn the world, but to save it. Jesus is God's way of saying, I would rather die than leave you as you are. Now, that being said, forgiveness of people, institutions, or even deities is a tough proposition because our natural inclination is to hold on to the heart and fester in the anger rather than choose a different path. Forgiveness is upside down. Forgiveness does not demand justice or retribution for previous wrongs. And this is a tough proposition for a legalistic and litigious humanity. When we are wrong, we demand and need justice in order for balance to be achieved. Forgiveness requires a lot more strength because it operates outside the bounds of our natural inclinations. Forgiveness requires you to be stronger than you've ever been. It will require more effort than being angry will. You see, the problem with holding on to anger is that it eats at you from the inside. To forgive, is to free yourself from the cancer that anger causes. But ultimately, it is the posture in which you are most powerful. Anger allows the sins of the past to continue their hold over you. Forgiveness is the path through which you sever the power that past sins have over you. Forgiveness is the path through which we're able to return to our true selves. Forgiveness is the path through which you become most like Christ and you are able to rediscover your faith. In the final moments before Jesus' death at Skull Hill, the place that the Romans crucified people that they considered to be enemies of the state, he does something that just defies logic. He prays for the forgiveness of the people that clamored for his crucifixion. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. It's because of moments like these that we're persuaded that Jesus was more than just a great guy, that he is worth following. Now, for the theology nitpickers, I understand that something greater is happening in the moment, the reason for our faith. He takes the sins of the world in his body and he pays in full the penalty of sin for the world. But there is also a very real man on a very real cross being killed for trumped up charges. And this is the reason why the narrative of the crucifixion is so compelling. It is more than just one thing or another. It is multifaceted. Jesus takes all the sins of the world, but he also takes a situation in which he is being publicly humiliated and turns it on its head. He has been wrongly accused, and even though he clearly was a zealot, the punishment did not fit the crime. And then in the greatest show of taking power away from the haters, he prays forgiveness for his accusers who were, in fact, the religious establishment of his time. The religious establishment had whipped the crowds up into such a frenzy that they clamored for the death of somebody that they had welcomed into their city 7 days before as a conqueror. It is in these moments that Christ distinguishes himself from any other would-be Messiah. And despite the insane things that the church has done through the years, it still remains the defining characteristic of the following that he inspired. As a result, it is in forgiveness that we truly find the path back to meaningful relationship with Jesus. If you want to rebuild your faith, you have to learn to forgive. It is in forgiving that you become more like the Savior who both inspires and deserves your loyalty and faith. And it is in the becoming that the foundations of our faith are restored, that the love for the fellowship that he created and inspired returns. And it is also in the becoming that you are able to see past the crap of the institutional churches of your past and instead see the communities of faith like us trying to change the narrative and write a new, compelling, emerging story inspired by the life and teachings of Jesus. But ultimately, the freedom and power of forgiveness cracks open the calluses over our hearts and allows us to fall in love with Christ again. If Jesus forgave the religious establishment of his time, we can surely learn from his example. To a bystander, a Jewish man hanging on a cross for crimes against the state is a display of the might of the state and the weakness of the person that would dare to challenge it. But to us who see him, Jesus, hear his prayers for forgiveness, and understand that something bigger is at play, it is a display of Jesus' most powerful moment. He is most powerful when he's forgiving. We are most powerful when we follow his example. The church is sparked into existence from his example of sacrifice and forgiveness. And our faith can find its spark again when we, like him, forgive. So I would call on anybody that wants to rebuild his or her faith to forgive God, forgive his flawed servants, forgive the religious institutions that harbored and protected those that wreaked havoc in your life. Forgiveness feels like letting them off the hook, doesn't it? Actually, it's not. Forgiveness is all about you and not about anybody else. It is all about finding the source of your power and life again. Forgiveness will ask more of you than you've ever been asked. But it will also reveal your most powerful self, your most Christ-like self, and your most free self. And as you find forgiveness in your heart, find communities like us, Pivot 613, where there are like-minded people working to rediscover Christ and our faith in him. You'll be surprised what a breath of fresh air they can be after the fear, judgment, and condemnation you previously experienced.